putting soil into bags and sealing them and selling them as fertilizers.
2-3 years.
Mr. Speaker, is this a country that we live in?
Square kilometers to theirs, which is not agreeable with the original that is known. And so some of these are encouraged by territorial expansion attitude. And then also resources are some of the reasons for conflicting and fighting, and especially for us pastoralists, where there is grass, where there is water. And so these are some of the things that, in my thinking, will be cured by this bill, so that resources are shared equally as much as possible, or provisions are made so that whatever is on the other side is also on the neighboring side, so that there is no conflicting on one given area. Because, for example, you take the example of water. Without water on one area among the neighbors, you can expect that there will be conflict on area that has the resource. And so this bill will probably solve it by bringing more resources to either side or both sides, so that there is equal sharing. And then you find also that politics plays a key role in some of the conflicts that we face, and especially politics that are instigated by politicians such as ourselves and the others, by inciting a community against another. And so people fight because a politician has said, people fight because a politician has said we are being marginalized, we are being this, we are being that, and therefore people conflict, and therefore this bill will probably be able to tame such utterances, so that there is no politician that will utter words that will make communities fight. And then maps and history are key components that should be followed when pursuing about territories and about boundaries between communities and between areas. What was it earlier on? For example, in the colonial time, what was it? Where was it? And then the maps that were there will also help, so that we do not fight over what we think now, because some of the opinions that we have now are as new as maybe in the 80s or 90s, and they may not be true. They may not agree with what was there in the 40s, in the 30s, in the 20s, and so on. So some of those old maps should be used to be able to determine which area belongs to who, and which community occupied where, and because some of the resources, as I said before, could be the reason for redrawing new maps and moving into new territories. But if we look into older maps and also history, especially for us pastoralists, there were movements that we made into areas, and those should also be looked into, who was grazing in which area when, and such kind of trace of the past will help. And then also it should be emphasized at this point that it is services that matter. it is services to the people and services to be given equally to the citizens, either on either side. But sometimes services are given in discrimination, and that also brings about conflicts among people, because you find that a minority group that is under a county, a certain county, will be denied services or will be given limited services, whereas the majority will take the lion's share. And therefore, this also is a reason for people to conflict and then desire to either move out or bring in other people so that they join together their efforts to be able to survive and get services from another county. And therefore, if services were given adequately and in a way that there's no discrimination, it would actually limit and probably eradicate some of the conflicts that we have. And so I support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mulgar, honorable members. Dear the move of the bill to reply.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to reply, and first of all thank the Leader of Majority, Senator Aaron Cheriot, for seconding this bill. I want to thank all the senators, and perhaps this is one of those bills that has received the contribution of very many senators, considering the situation of county boundary disputes across the country. As we speak, we know that there's an active conflict between Kisii and Nyamira. There's an active conflict between Makueni and Taita Taveta. There's an active conflict between Kisumu and Kericho, between Vihiga and Kisumu. And Mr. Speaker, when I was moving, I indicated that there are about 40 petitions relating to disputes on boundaries. When I was moving, I mentioned some things which perhaps some members did not take into account when they made their contribution. This bill does not attempt to rewrite the boundaries of counties. And Mr. Speaker, it would be good for us to go back to history. And as I was processing this bill, I took the opportunity to read some of the transcripts of the 1962 Constitutional Conference. And some of those conversations were held at Lancaster. The Independence Constitution defined districts. And Mr. Speaker, it was in Article 36 of the Independent Constitution, which addressed the composition of the Senate. It is under the composition of the Senate that the districts were defined. And Article 36 of that Constitution, Mr. Speaker, said that Kenya shall be divided into 40 districts and Nairobi region, and each district shall elect one senator. That was at independence. So the definition of the number of districts was in the Constitution. The Independence Constitution did something that the 2010 Constitution did not do, because the boundaries of these districts were put in the Constitution. And there was a Schedule 2, Part 1. And Mr. Speaker, the first district whose boundaries were defined was Tana River. The District and Provinces Act, by and large, took the boundaries of districts as contained in the Independence Constitution. Between 1963 and 1992, Mr. Speaker, from the 40 independent districts, by 1992 we had 46 districts that formed the basis of the counties that we have today. The additional districts were Migori, which was hived off South Nyanza, so we ended up with Migori and Homabay instead of South Nyanza. Tharaka Nithi, which was hived off Meru, Makueni, which came off Machakos, Bomet, which came off Kericho, Vihiga, which came off Kakamega in 1990, and Nyamira, which came off Kisii in 1989. So that's how we ended up with the 46+1. Now, subsequent to that, President Moi and President Kibaki created almost 200 additional districts. And so when the team that went to Naivasha, Mr. Speaker, we must also recognize that when the Constitution was being written, interestingly, in the history of this republic, I think William Ruto was the chair of the Select Committee on Constitutional Reform in Parliament. And so when people went to Naivasha, they were looking for a quick solution to something that was very sticky on how the territory of Kenya would be divided. Would it be on the basis of regions? Would it be on the basis of districts? But at the time people were going to Naivasha, there had been almost 200 districts that had been created by Moi and President Kibaki, because districts were being created for political reward. And Mr. Speaker, it is on record that in 2009, the High Court declared that all districts created after 1992 were unconstitutional. And Mr. Speaker, the reason was the presidents would issue decrees to create districts, and then they legalize thereafter. This is what led the men and women who gave birth to this constitution in Naivasha to go back to the 1992 District and Provinces Act. It was safer. It was easier to go back to 1963, which had 40. But because the districts had been validated only up to 1992, that was the threshold, that was a benchmark that the crafters of a constitution utilized. Was there science? Perhaps not. If you read the report of the commission, there was something called the Royal Boundaries Commission, Mr. Speaker. The 40 original districts were created on tribal grounds. It was more of ensuring that each tribe had its own conclave, which they could control and where they could feel comfortable. The 40 original districts, history tells us that 3/4 of them were composed of entirely one tribe. And the other 1/4, you'd find one tribe would dominate almost 90–80%. And so that's why we keep having these problems we are having with our counties, because they've been inherited from districts that were created on tribal basis. And Mr. Speaker, those of us who sit in the accountability committees, Senator Cherargei, Senator Sifuna, every time the Auditor General tells us that County X has failed to live up to the requirement of the law on ethnic composition. And Mr. Speaker, we must go back to the law and ask ourselves whether we are being relevant. A county that was formed on the basis of a district that was formed on the basis of ethnicity, how then do we expect it to be heterogeneous all of a sudden? And yet it was ethnically homogeneous at the point of creation. And so I want to assure and allay the fears of those colleagues who think that in this bill we are attempting to rewrite the boundaries of counties. And I want to challenge them to go to the Independence Constitution, which defined the original 40 districts, and compare with the District and Provinces Act. And if they can cite any alteration, Mr. Speaker, I will gladly withdraw this bill, because it is not my intention to cause any further strife over and above that which has existed. Mr. Speaker, the team that was in Bomas, the NADCO team, and the report which this House has already adopted, pointed out that boundary disputes are a threat to cohesion and encourage Parliament to quickly enact a law that will give effect to the constitutional provision on alteration of county boundaries, districts that were created. Mr. Speaker, it is the courts of law that declared them to be unconstitutional for reasons that were even canvassed in Parliament. And I've seen the parliamentary Hansard, where each member of Parliament wanted a district to be created in their backyard because they thought it would come with benefits, but then the court ruled that it was improper and unconstitutional. And so I just want to give that comfort that this bill does not intend to introduce any alteration. This bill has been moved by a member from the opposition and has been seconded by the leader of majority. I will take time, Mr. Speaker, in consultation with the leadership of the majority and the leadership of the minority, to ensure that all the good suggestions that have come from members are incorporated as we proceed to the next stage of this bill. I want to thank honorable members of Senate for their dedication, for their commitment, for living up to their calling as defenders and protectors of devolution. And I want to assure them that when the amendments come, we shall consult to make sure that every amendment that we put forth, we are able to explain its merit or demerit, and we are going to learn lessons from past attempts and make sure that this bill does not suffer in the other house the same way it has done in the past. Mr. Speaker, with that, I beg to reply and request that you defer the putting of the question to a later date pursuant to Standing Order 66.3. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Kajwang. Putting of the question to this particular.
Order number 10, the Sugar Bill, National Assembly Bills number 34 of 2022, second reading. Resumption of debate interrupted on Thursday, 21st March, 2024.
Those are double lessons. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was spewing wisdom last time before, Honorable Speaker, this sugar bill, as I was speaking to Kenyans, the sugar industry serves at most 400,000 small-scale farmers, and as you know, these numbers, when you do your multiply effect, Honorable Speaker, many Kenyans rely on the sugar industry to put food on their table, to take their children to school, and that is why the bill comes in handy to ensure that we boost productivity, streamline processing, enhance value addition, create favorable regulatory framework. And this legislation is expected to revive the industry to meet the domestic needs and generate surplus for export. Honorable Speaker, this bill, as we are going across the country, in Bungoma, Vihiga, by extension Kisumu, Kericho, Busia, there are a few challenges and observations that came across, Honorable Speaker. That we have challenges of sugar production. Sugar producers face a number of challenges, including inadequate infrastructure, high production costs, limited access to modern technology. This bill will put into framework and an environment within which these producers can be able to mitigate with conjunction with county government and national government to improve on that. The market dynamics, Honorable Speaker, also came into play because the local industry faced a lot of challenge from the importation of sugar. And as you all know, Honorable Speaker, the lack of the sugar board to mitigate and ensure that we only import when there is a deficiency gave leeway to cartels who use government opportunities to flood the market and deny the common farmer and industry the capacity to flourish under that. Honorable Speaker, the need for investment, the importance of increased investment in the sugar industry to improve and modernize infrastructure, improve competitiveness. This is the reason why this bill must go through. Stakeholder collaboration, Honorable Speaker, this bill captures many stakeholders. You have government, county government, millers, and when all these stakeholders come together, you have a collaboration that is geared towards ensuring that the farmer gets good of his hard work. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, committee, we have an aspect of adjudication of issues, and all this is to ensure that the industry is sustained. Because if you have an arbitration committee, if you have a pricing committee that will look at the pricing of the sugarcane from farmers, our people will have to enjoy at the end of the day. Honorable Speaker, some element that is also here that members will want to know is that we have some catchment area and zoning, which has come in handy because history has shown that we have millers and companies who have flourished in overriding and domineering over others, exhibiting dictatorial tendencies and therefore making the farmer to suffer. This bill gives zones and a catchment area.
Hold your thoughts, Senator Wafula. Senator from Kirinyaga, you have been in this house enough to know the procedures of crossing over from one aisle to the other. Go back, comply, then you proceed. Proceed, Senator Wafula.
Honorable Speaker, the zoning and the catchment area. Companies have been, or millers have been put together in a zone, and that zone provides a catchment area for them. This ensures, Honorable Speaker, that companies have an opportunity to operate within that specific area, compete in terms of pricing in that particular area, and gives the farmer an opportunity to benefit from that catchment area. Honorable Speaker, that catchment area turning into a zone gives the farmers an opportunity to equally get representation to the sugar board. So we are dealing with a scenario where the boundaries will give the companies an opportunity to harvest cane from that area and representation of farmers from those areas. Honorable Speaker, this sugar board will be able to give guidance in terms of sugar inspectors, where the inspectors will ensure the millers do the right thing in terms of human resource, hygiene, and environmental concerns. They will be able to ensure the quality of sugarcane given to farmers is monitored both by the county government and the millers. Therefore, I don't want to be able to go into much detail, but to assure Kenyans that today we have begun a new chapter where we are bringing to them a bill that will sort out the sugar industry mess and bring sanity to this industry. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I therefore call the Leader of Majority, my good friend, Senator Aaron Cheruiyot, to second. Thank you.
Senator Aaron proceeds to second the bill.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to second this bill, the Sugar Bill, National Assembly Bill number 34 of 2022. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is an extremely important bill touching on an industry that has been long neglected over the years, yet has the opportunity actually to give livelihood to millions of Kenyans and also save our country billions of shillings that we spend importing sugar from other countries that have organized their sector better than us to their farmers. Mr. Speaker, as hours continue to wallow in poverty. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'd wish to congratulate my colleague, Senator Nkoli, a member in this house, but who has quickly studied and established himself to the ways and practices of legislative culture, and today has moved a bill, Mr. Speaker, of an important, extremely important industry in this republic, and has done so with such zeal, Mr. Speaker, such dedication over the last few weeks. As I have consulted with him, listened to the stakeholders, and the stakeholders of this industry came to Senator Murango's committee. Mr. Speaker, I made sure that I found time to go and listen. I always try to create time, though I'm not a member of any committee as majority leader, Mr. Speaker, to listen, especially to presentations before the Agriculture Committee, touching on issues to do with the livelihood of our farmers, Mr. Speaker, because I wouldn't wish to one day pass a bill in this House, Mr. Speaker, that in a negative way ends up affecting the livelihood of the people I represent. I represent sugarcane farmers. Kericho is more known, Mr. Speaker, for tea, but the southern part of the county, Mr. Speaker, 3 constituencies to be specific, have actually sugarcane plantations, and they are so lush and green, well manicured, and equally as useful to the economy of the county of Kericho, Mr. Speaker, as tea is, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, a few days ago, I had visited a friend in Trans Nzoia, and later on, I was to visit another friend who lived closer to Lake Kanyabol in Siaya County, Mr. Speaker. And on the way, as I traversed from Trans Nzoia, coming into about them, but even the pilot that we were with on that journey did make a comment on the dedication of our farmers, Mr. Speaker, and the kind of work that they continue to do. Many senators, Mr. Speaker, in this House do not perhaps appreciate and know how much potential sugarcane farming has in their specific counties and how much it can alleviate millions of their constituents out of poverty if we manage this sector better, Mr. Speaker. It's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that we allowed this sector to collapse, Mr. Speaker, due to greed, Mr. Speaker, and many people that wanted to make a quick kill and quick money, Mr. Speaker, out of this particular industry, because the quickest way to make money out of the sugar sector, Mr. Speaker, is to open importation, Mr. Speaker, and therefore people go, you purchase from either Uganda and other COMESA countries, or sometimes even from the non-COMESA countries, because once every 4 or 5 years, Mr. Speaker, statistically, there is a sugar deficit in all the COMESA zones, and on such occasions, Mr. Speaker, you find that countries in the COMESA region open up for importation, Mr. Speaker, of sugar from non-COMESA regions. One such season, Mr. Speaker, the closest was the 2022 towards the end, and pretty much the entire of 2023, Mr. Speaker. And this was a phenomenon that was observed in almost all East African countries, from Tanzania, Uganda, to the rest of the COMESA region, where there was a shortage, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, unscrupulous business people, Mr. Speaker, have over the years taken advantage, instead of only importing during that particular season, because of the money that they make in that particular season, Mr. Speaker, they want to extend that culture over and above, even beyond periods which our own farmers can produce, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, if we don't put the checks and balances, and I'm particularly impressed, Mr. Speaker, that we are proposing in this bill actually the creation and the setting up of the sugar board, a return to the back in the days when sugarcane farming was thriving in the villages, Mr. Speaker, where you had a board, Mr. Speaker, that would guide the operations and would even give approval, complete with statistics of what is the expected deficit of sugar in the country, Mr. Speaker, open up importation only to show up the numbers, ensure that there is enough supply in the country, Mr. Speaker, but at the same time cushion our farmers and returning to the good old days of the sugar directive, just like we did with the tea bill, Mr. Speaker, where you have a board that is dedicated and specific, people with organic knowledge, Mr. Speaker, on a particular area and field, Mr. Speaker, where if things go wrong, you can take on that particular either board chair or board members, Mr. Speaker. I like the fact that even in this bill, we're actually proposing the election of representatives to this board, so that if the people of Narok, where Senator Ledama Olekina comes, are very key, Mr. Speaker, sugarcane growing county, Mr. Speaker, a county that has immense potential. They will have an opportunity to elect a representative, Mr. Speaker, into this particular board, Mr. Speaker, as well as the rest of our colleagues, Mr. Speaker, so that if we find ourselves in a situation such as we are today, Mr. Speaker, where cheap imports are competing with sugarcane produced in our various factories, Mr. Speaker, we'll be able to take on our board members and ask them, who granted this approval? What were the statistics that guided you in making this particular decision, Mr. Speaker? And therefore, I am particularly impressed, Mr. Speaker, with the direction that you're taking. In fact, I want to request our whips. Senator Boni Halwale is not here, but Whip Ledama and Sifuna are here, that if possible, once members have debated this bill either today and tomorrow, that before we proceed on recess for the 2 weeks recess, on Thursday, if we can do committee of the whole for this bill, Mr. Speaker, it will be an important exercise, because I have seen many times, and Senator Sifuna, you know this for a fact, that when you go to functions, for example, in the western belt of the country, even in my own county of Kericho, in the sugarcane growing areas, farmers are getting jittery with us as senators and continue to ask us, what happened? This bill came to you more than a year ago. You are taking too long with it, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it is my sincere hope that before we break on recess, we shall be able to find the time, Mr. Speaker, and the dedication to conclude on the bill so that it proceeds to the National Assembly. Either they agree on town or city of Mumias, for example, the epitome and the poster boy, Mr. Speaker, of the failed industry that used to be the sugar industry. A town that was thriving back in the 90s and the early 2000s, Mr. Speaker, when Mumia Sugarcane Company, Mr. Speaker, was roaring in profitability, Mr. Speaker, and many things that they used to do, including even running of schools, social programs, Mr. Speaker, like football clubs. Mr. Speaker, some of the best footballers that we produced came from the teams that were being supported by the various sugar industries, Mr. Speaker. Today, you cannot speak of the same. Not to forget, Mr. Speaker, the millions of livelihoods that were affected by the collapse of our industries, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I am impressed with the proposal that is being made in this particular bill, Mr. Speaker. First of all, to convert and remove sugar as a directorate from AFA and set up this sugar directorate, Mr. Speaker. And the introduction of sugar levy that will particularly be used, Mr. Speaker, to first do cane development, an extremely important exercise, Mr. Speaker, provide stability to our farmers, Mr. Speaker. If you go, Mr. Speaker, many times you travel to countries like Mauritius, Mr. Speaker, you will see that they have farmers' bank. But apart even from having a farmers' bank, Mr. Speaker, the last time I was in Mauritius, an important country that grows its cane, they have actually a sugar bank. And there's nothing else that they do other than provide capital support to their farmers, Mr. Speaker, so that they are able to develop their farms in good time, that during the break season, because sugar takes long, Mr. Speaker, before it matures in the farm, and therefore, if a farmer is not provided with proper capital support, they are either bound to abandon that particular trade, Mr. Speaker, or even sometimes sell their cane before it is properly mature, Mr. Speaker, or abandon the trade altogether and prefer to do other farming such as dairy and tea that you are paid more frequently, Mr. Speaker. I have seen the proposal and other documentation of what this administration intends to do with the sugar sector, including the privatization that is not particularly mentioned in this document, but I know is important and related, Mr. Speaker. Zoning has been mentioned prominently, and I know there are people that have concerns, Mr. Speaker, about zoning. And when we went to the committee, Mr. Speaker, we were particularly interested in telling the committee that much as zoning is important so that farmers can also learn the culture of sticking, because the challenge, Mr. Speaker, why factories? Because when the millers came to us, Mr. Speaker, and when they made their presentation before their committee, they said, unfortunately, Kenyans haven't learned the art of being decent and disciplined. That many times you find farmers who come to you as a factory, they take farm inputs, Mr. Speaker, but unfortunately, during the time for delivery of cane, they deliver it elsewhere, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, there was need to engage in this business of zoning so that you are able, Mr. Speaker, to have farmers have a working relationship that is solid and established between the farming community and the millers, Mr. Speaker. On the other side, to counterbalance zoning, Mr. Speaker, it is important also to provide an avenue, Mr. Speaker, for competition so that farmers do not feel that they have been clogged up and are being forced to mill with a particular miller only, Mr. Speaker, where there is no competition, especially with regards to two things. Number one, Mr. Speaker, is the price of cane. And I like that with the of the pricing committee, Mr. Speaker, that they will be able to determine, and there is a scientific formula that is set out on determining what is the price, Mr. Speaker, and that will be the work of the board, that sugarcane farmers are supposed to be paid per ton for delivery of cane to a particular factory, Mr. Speaker, and to all the factories depending on the region where they are. But it is important, Mr. Speaker, because we do not have many operational mills, Mr. Speaker. Many of our government mills, Mr. Speaker, you know, that are no longer operational or they don't pay farmers in time, Mr. Speaker. And it's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that each time this industry tries to make strides in the right direction, such as with the privatization, there are people who go to court, Mr. Speaker, and they stop the exercise in its entirety, Mr. Speaker. Yet we know part of the reason some of the of our regions, Mr. Speaker, and farmers gave up in this exercise of planting cane, Mr. Speaker, is because they were delivering to government mills which cannot afford to pay them, Mr. Speaker. And we do not have enough private builders to take care of this. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, that is why I support the decision on privatization, Mr. Speaker. So long as we continue to guard, Mr. Speaker, these mills and ensure that the nucleus and the farm, Mr. Speaker, remains under the ownership of our county governments, Mr. Speaker. Privatization is a step in the right direction, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I was making my point on zoning and why it is important, Mr. Speaker, so that particular farmers, Mr. Speaker, deal with the factories in their region, Mr. Speaker. If you open it up and make it free of charge, Mr. Speaker, and there is cane hawking and all these things, practices, these are items that were properly dealt with. For those of us that were in Kisumu in 2022, when former governor of Kakamega, Wycliffe Oparanya, Mr. Speaker, presented their report of the sugar subsector task force report, Mr. Speaker, and they dealt into the importance of zoning, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with the proposals that they have made. The only addition that I make, Mr. Speaker, is that we must open up to counties, for example, the county of Nandi, where Senator Cherargei comes from. There are particular farmers in specific regions, areas of Chemase, Mr. Speaker, where, because in that particular county, there is no sugar mill, Mr. Speaker. That time they feel left out. That if you zone them to a particular region, Mr. Speaker, they either have to operate with West Kenya, which is fairly a distance, or West Valley in Kericho, or Kibos and Chemili, Mr. Speaker, and Moroni, Mr. Speaker. That it is important for the board to be given the powers to look at such rare occurrences on a case-by-case basis, Mr. Speaker, and grant permission for milling companies to pick and collect cane from such farmers, Mr. Speaker, so that they don't feel their cage, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to urge my colleagues to support this bill in the proposal that is being made, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, the very solid proposals on how to grow and move this sector, Mr. Speaker. On issues of licensing and setting up of the Sugar Arbitration Tribunal, Mr. Speaker, so that if there are changes, Mr. Speaker, you are able to propose to it. The only part of the bill that I hold a different view, much as I second, Mr. Speaker, is on the breakdown of the levy. Given what is about to be done in this sector, Mr. Speaker, on privatization and on farmers now being able to access inputs, you know, the fertilizer subsidy program has contributed actually, Mr. Speaker, immensely to the growth of this sector. That's why last year, a bag of 50 kg of sugar was costing upwards of 9,000 or 10,000 Kenya shillings. Today, Mr. Speaker, if you went to a wholesale supermarket, it's 5,200 shillings because of the supply of fertilizer, Mr. Speaker, and other inputs, so that our farmers are able to produce. Of course, God has also been good to us by ensuring that there is sufficient rains, Mr. Speaker. The sugar, this sugar levy, Mr. Speaker, we have to rethink on numbers because, unfortunately, and Senator Murango, you'll bear me witness, when the various players of that industry appeared before the Agriculture Committee, you could see that this, because of the long history of this particular industry, Mr. Speaker, there are no farmer association and organization committees, Mr. Speaker, that you would say this one specifically handle a particular task, Mr. Speaker. You'll find that they are fragmented and breaking, say, South Nyanza, Sugar Farmers Association, and so on and so forth. Therefore, when you dedicate such huge amounts, say like 5% of the sugar development levy to farmer associations, with these associations, Mr. Speaker, you can end up providing an avenue where certain well-connected cartels, Mr. Speaker, can end up lining their pockets with money that would have been otherwise put to good use, such as maybe extending credit services to farmers who are waiting for long periods before they are paid or before their crop is ready, Mr. Speaker. Actually, the Sugarcane Farmers Organization, in my honest opinion, and I hope the committee can listen to me, instead of using a percentage, you'd rather set it to a particular figure, 70 million or 100 million maximum, Mr. Speaker, because their duty is just to voice out concerns of farmers, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, farmers already have a representative who sit in the board. I don't think that to such amorphous organization where they are not properly defined in law, it is prudent use of public funds to set billions of money to their direction, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, with those very many remarks, I beg to second and urge our colleagues that we conclude on this business kindly before we proceed on recess. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Senators, I propose the question that the Sugar Bill, Senate Bills number 34 of 2023 be now read a second time.
Honorable Senators, I have from my desk a good number of you who are seeking to contribute to this particular bill. I will, since the chairperson of the Agriculture Committee is tabling his report, which just approved for tabling, I will allow him to table the report and contribute to the bill. And immediately thereafter, I will run the membership to contribute immediately. Senator Murango, proceed to table that report and contribute to the bill.
Asante sana mstahiki Spika. Naomba kuwasilisha ripoti ya mswada wa sukari wa mwaka 2023 katika jumba la Seneti. Asante. Mstahiki Spika, sukari kwa wenye wanatumia imekuwa tamu, lakini kwa wakulima imekuwa chungu. Na wakati tumekuwa tukizunguka kama kamati ya ukulima, uvuvi, mifugo na uchumi samawati katika maeneo ambayo yanakuzwa sukari, tumejionea wakulima ambao wamekuwa wamenyanyasika, ambao wameteseka kwa muda kwa sababu ya sheria na usimamizi mbaya wa sukari nchini. Na ndiposa mswada ambao uliotufikia kupitia kwa mdhamini Wafula wa Koli, tukaamua kwenda mpaka mashinani kukutana na wakulima wenyewe kama ilivyo kawaida yetu. Tulienda katika maeneo ya Busia, tukaenda Bungoma, Kakamega, tukaenda mpaka Chemilu katika Kisumu, na pia tukapokea nakala kutoka kwa wenye wakulima wa miwa kutoka sehemu ya Kwale, Ramisi. Ningetaka kushukuru maseneta wote tulioshirikiana katika ile safari, akiwemo seneta wa Kakamega Bon Harware, Daktari Bon Harware, seneta wa Bungoma Wafula wa Koli, seneta wa Busia Omtata, seneta wa Kisumu Profesa Onjienda, na pia wale maseneta wengine akiwepo seneta Sifuna ambao alikuwa wanafuatilia kwa kina na kwa ukaribu sana mswada huu wa kuweza kufanya sukari, wakulima wa sukari waweze kunufaika. Mstahiki Spika, ukiona majonzi ambayo ilikuwa na wakulima wa miwa wakati walikuwa wanakuja katika kikao cha kamati ya ukulima ya Seneti kuja kujieleza, ndo Spika ungejua ya kwamba wakulima katika maeneo yale wametatizika kwa muda. Wakulima waliotoka katika sehemu za Nandi na Kericho wakashuka mpaka Chemelu kuja kuwasilisha maoni yao hawajasahaulika kwa sababu ya shinda zilizokuwepo na wale wakulima. Mstahiki Spika, sitakaa nikielezea sana, lakini niruhusu niseme hili ya kwamba vyama vya ushirika vya wenye kusaga miwa kama Zoia, wafanyikazi ambao wanja alipwa mishahara zao na bado miwa inakatwa na kupelekwa katika vituo vya kusaga miwa, ni jambo lilikuwa la kutia hofu. Na mstahiki Spika, ndio maana tuliweza kukuja na zoning kwa mipaka ili tuweze kuangalia miwa mahali inapelekwa, na pia katika uchaguzi kwa wale wanaosimamia ukulima wa miwa. Na katika bodi ya sukari, kamati ya Seneti ilihakikisha kwamba wakulima ndio wako na wakilishi wale wengi zaidi. ili malalamiko ya wakulima iweze kutatuliwa, na kama kuna upigaji kula kwa jambo linalotokea, kuhakikisha kwamba sauti ya mkulima ndio itakuwa ikisikizwa. Mstahiki Spika, unapoangalia katika kusaka kwa miwa, unaona kwamba sukari inapouzwa pia kuna malighafi ambayo inabakia katika mitambo ya kusagia. Kuna ile sukari nguru na vinginevyo ambavyo vinatumiwa na wakulima kutengeneza chakula cha kulisha ng'ombe na pia kusaidia sana katika uchumi wa nchi hii. Wakulima walalamikia kwamba wanapouza sukari, malighafi yanayobaki, pesa inayopatikana kutokana na yale malighafi, wale wafaidiki kama. Na ndio huu mswada tulio nao, sheria tunaotunga inafaa kutatua mambo kama yale. Pia kuna usafirishaji wa miwa. Usafirishaji wa miwa kutoka eneo moja mpaka eneo lingine lazima udhibitiwe, kwa sababu tusipofanya hivyo, na ndio maana hiyo katika ile sheria tuko nayo tumeweka hapo, ni kwamba tutaua vyama vya ushirika na pia wale wanaopeana pembejeo katika wakulima. Ukiangalia mkasa uliopata kiwanda cha kusaga miwa cha Nzoia, ni kwamba kuna wakulima waliopewa pembejeo wakalimiwa shamba, lakini wakachukua. Mimi nitamalizia kusema ya kwamba mghala muue na haki yake umpe. Na kama tutakuwa na nchi nzuri ambayo ina maendeleo kila kona, lazima tuhakikisha kwamba kila eneo, kila magatuzi yote 50 na 40 na samba, wale wakazi wanapata nafasi ya mmea ambao utakuwa nawapatia pesa. Na ndio maana kamati ya ukulima imejitahidi sana na kuja na mswada wa pamba ambao umepitishwa hapa na maseneta. Mswada wa ndengu ulipitishwa na maseneta, mswada wa kahawa ulipitishwa hapa na maseneta, na sasa ni maombi yangu ifikapo mwisho wa wiki hii tutapitisha mswada wa miwa ili kusaidia wakazi na wazao wa nchi. Asante sana Mstahiki Spika.
Thank you, Senator
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In my other life, I am a contracted farmer with Sugarcane. And yes, it's something that many people might not know. Mr. Speaker, I am not a rich man, but my grandfather, the late Joel Mabele Sifuna, had a farm in Kitinda village of Bungoma County, where the mover of this motion is my senator at home. And when he died, in his will, he instructed that the grandchildren are the ones who are going to till that land. So I have a 4-acre section, Honorable Speaker. Only a small section that I grow cane, and it was contracted to Nzoia Sugar, where I delivered my cane for some years before the factory collapsed, and it became untenable for me to continue with that business. Mr. Speaker, I want first to thank the sponsor of this motion in the National Assembly, the Honorable Wangwe, who we share many things other than him being a sugarcane farmer like me, Mr. Speaker. We are also travelers and users of that infamous C41 road, which has taken forever to complete construction, Mr. Speaker, despite assurances by successive governments that there are contractors working on that road. That is the road that leads to my rural home. And one of these fine days, I might invite you, Mr. Speaker, and the members of this House to meet my mother, and they will use that road. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by saying that there are very many positives that I can see are a direct response to the challenges that farmers have faced over the years. Mr. Speaker, first of all, it has been the complaint of a minority in this House that successive bills that have been brought to this House have tried to usurp the powers and roles of county governments. I can see that from the beginning of the provisions of this bill, there is clear recognition of the role of the county governments, and it starts off at Section 4 on the constitution of the board, the Sugar Board. Mr. Speaker, you will see that at Section 5 of the Act or the bill, there are functions of the county government that are clearly outlined, including extension services which we used to have when we were growing up, but somehow, somewhere, they disappeared. These extension services were very important, Mr. Speaker, in terms of providing support for farmers, for the critical, support for them to grow the crop. There is also a responsibility on them to do the road network for the supply and delivery of cane. And this is very critical. In many areas, if you go to Bungoma County, Mr. Speaker, the roads that were assigned as county roads or the roads that were being used to deliver cane They were very well maintained, Mr. Speaker. Those of us like myself and Honorable Wangwe, the Member of Parliament for Navakholo, are unfortunate that our homes are on a road that has been handed over to a contractor who is not there. The road is recognized. If you go to section 6 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, you can see that there is provision for nominees of county governments in this sugar board, which is something that I am very happy. Mr. Speaker, let me address this question of zoning or protection against poaching that has been provided for under Section 19. Mr. Speaker, this was a very difficult debate between farmers and millers and members of this committee, of the Agriculture Committee, and even the sponsors of the bill, and during the discussions of the task force. One of the things that the chairman of the committee, Agriculture Committee, has said here that I have experienced myself, Mr. Speaker, we had the specter of farmers getting inputs from specific mills. So you would get fertilizer, seed cane from Zoya Sugar. But when the crop is ready and you can see that there are too many delays and you have financial pressure to take your children to school, whoever comes with money, which is this term called poaching, they would come and pay the farmer and will go away. What resulted in that is that there is not only, Mr. Speaker, debts that fell due from the millers themselves, even the outgrower companies, because this fertilizer used to be distributed through the outgrower companies, the Nzoia outgrower company, for instance, of which I am a member. Mr. Speaker, the problem has been that government, after forgiving the debts of the millers, forgot that very similar circumstances exist when it comes to the outgrower companies. And Mr. Speaker, in this particular instance, I want to say that I have been directed or asked or requested by the outgrower companies themselves to request government that just the way they forgave or waived the debts that are the millers themselves, we also consider waiving the debts that are still on the books of the outgrower companies that arose out of similar circumstances of farmers, one miller selling that crop to another person. Mr. Speaker, I have seen that the bill has introduced a fine of not less than 1 million shillings or 3 times the value of the cane, whichever is higher, if you are found as a miller poaching cane. So while others might look at it as a zoning issue, we are also trying to deal with this question of poaching of cane. We have millers who don't develop any of their nucleuses. They don't spend any time recruiting farmers to actually cultivate this crop, but they poach other people's cane. And I've been, informed of a specter, Mr. Speaker. When you see a sugar mill existing in an area where there is no sugar cane being grown, it always raises a red flag. Mr. Speaker, when you go to Section 23 of the bill, there is provision for anybody who wants to import sugarcane to only import what is called a deficit, an established deficit of the supply of sugar locally. So that, Mr. Speaker, one of the biggest complaints of farmers has been that we are being forced to compete with those people who import sugar when we have sufficient sugar on the ground. So it will be the responsibility of the board to establish that before an import license or import permit is given, there is actually that deficit. Mr. Speaker, I am also happy with the provision on sugar inspectors under Section 34 and Section 35, who have the powers to enter any premises, because in the past few years, Mr. Speaker, we have seen smuggling of sugar into the country, and also importation of sugar that is either substandard or unfit for human consumption, or even criminals importing sugar that is laced with very hazardous chemicals, Mr. Speaker. These sugar inspectors will have that power to enter any premises, to seize any product for as long as there is reasonable grounds to suspect that there is something wrong with that sugar. Mr. Speaker, also, I am very happy that the proponents of this bill have in the bill provided for sugar agreements. These are agreements between growers and millers, or agreements between growers and outgrower institutions, or millers and outgrowers. Mr. Speaker, if you will read the bill and the provisions on what those sugarcane agreements should contain, they provide clarity between the farmer and the miller on how that relationship is going to be governed, and it is something that I would very much support, Mr. Speaker. Then there is the introduction of these sugar pricing committees, which also have representatives of growers, and Mr. Speaker, also 2 representatives of the counties under Section 58. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. the responsibility of these pricing committees is to come up with pricing formulas, and when they are doing that job, Mr. Speaker, they have to consider various factors, including, Mr. Speaker, cane-related charges paid by the farmer. Mr. Speaker, you will also see that they have provided for a formula that takes into account delayed harvesting, because one of the issues we have in the sugar growing areas, Mr. Speaker, is that you will be told this sugar cane matures in 18 months, and we have farmers who have stayed with their crop for over 2 years waiting for harvesting. And Mr. Speaker, the losses that they incur in that particular instance should actually be compensated. Mr. Speaker, allow me to say that I would be proposing only a few amendments with regards to a few things that are of concern for me. I have the honor, Mr. Speaker, of not only being a sugarcane farmer in Bungoma, but I also represent a county where the biggest source of revenue and the biggest source of jobs for our people are industries, Mr. Speaker. I have had a conversation with both sponsors of this bill in the National Assembly and even in the Senate about the concerns that have been raised by industry with regard to the introduction of the sugar development levy on industrial white sugar, which, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the definition of industrial white sugar under Section 2, is sugar that is used as a sweetener or a preservative. Mr. Speaker, this industrial white sugar is used in just about every or many consumer products. The biggest, of course, is the beverage industry. It is used in soft drinks, Mr. Speaker. You have your sodas, juices, jams, jellies, and also in baked goods, pharmaceuticals, even cosmetics, Mr. Speaker. Those of you who use moisturizers would be nice to, No, I don't use moisturizers, Mr. Speaker. Protect me from Senator Crystal Asigo. I'm a Bukusu man. Our skin takes care of itself. Mr. Speaker, even dairy products like yogurt, they use industrial sugar in the manufacture. And the problem, Mr. Speaker, is that if you put that levy on industrial sugar, we are going to see an increase in these consumer prices. I forgot to mention, Mr. Speaker, that it is also used in the manufacture of beer. Mr. Speaker, this is something that we need to look very closely at, because what we don't have in this country is the capacity to manufacture this industrial sugar. And the manufacturers are telling us that for as long as we do not have that capacity to manufacture white industrial sugar, imposing that levy at 4%, similar to the regular sugar, is going to inconvenience many of these manufacturers because of the constraints of supply. If we do not have the capacity to produce, Mr. Speaker, then we should not be levying that 4% sugar development levy until we have the capacity to produce locally. When I spoke to Honorable Wango, he told me that one of the big concerns is that people want to import sugar under the guise of it being white industrial sugar, and it has happened before. And then sooner or later you find it in the markets being used for purposes other than as a sweetener or as a preservative. And I have tried to persuade him that it is possible for us to deal with the few bad eggs and not necessarily castigate the entire manufacturing industry. Mr. Speaker, I'll give you the example of beer, because this is something I understand very well. I think it's a matter of record on this house that in Nairobi they call me a minister of celebrations. Mr. Speaker, if this levy is passed, we are looking at an average increase of between 6 and 15 shillings on the average retail price of a bottle of beer. And this is very critical, coming at a time when the government is involved with a very serious war on consumption of illicit alcohol. Mr. Speaker, during a recent seminar that was organized by the Alcoholic Beverages Association of Kenya, it was revealed that 59% of Kenyans consume illicit alcohol. And I'm telling you the truth. I have that report, Mr. Speaker. I don't know why Senator Cherargei is expressing shock. Mr. Speaker, out of the 180 shillings recommended retail price of a bottle of, say, Tusker Light, Mr. Speaker, 110 shillings goes to taxes. So that if you increase that further by 6 or 15 shillings, it pushes it out of the reach of many Kenyans. And Mr. Speaker, this is something that is going to affect our war on illicit alcohol. Mr. Speaker, it is also projected that if we are to impose that 4% levy, development levy on local or imported industrial sugar, a 300 ml mug of the cheapest beer, which is named after this house, Senator Keg, Mr. Speaker, is going to increase by at least 2 shillings. And this is also going to impact the war on illicit alcohol. Mr. Speaker, I also want this house to consider that there is a value supply chain in the manufacture of some of these products that I'm talking about. For instance, there are farmers who've been contracted recently to supply raw materials for the manufacture of beer. Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of employment that is created in the agricultural sector. In places such as Homabay, I have seen many contracted farmers growing sorghum. Mr. Speaker, there is also the specter of employment being lost in the manufacturing itself, including at EABL. Mr. Speaker, last year, for the first time in many years, a company as big as EABL declared some redundancies and some job losses, which is something that we are staring at. For as long as they are not making the sort of sales that they used to make, Mr. Speaker, we are going to have a problem. Then there is work that is in the distribution network, and then, of course, in the service industry. Many who suffered during the time when pubs were closed in Nairobi during COVID. Mr. Speaker, we speak to those people. They are a good source of employment. Mr. Speaker, I also want to address this question. Looking at the provisions of the bill at section 23, we spoke about this need for import permits. At section 23 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, we think, those of us in Nairobi, that the government should be able to control the importation of industry-wide sugar, because at the end of the day, you need an import permit for you to be able to import this sugar. I just want to read section 23, Mr. Speaker, where it provides under section 23, subsection 3, that a person who imports sugar into Kenya shall, prior to importation, provide evidence that the sugar they intend to import is not available in the local market. The evidence that we do not provide or produce industry-wide sugar is there. So for you to have this requirement here, Mr. Speaker, I believe that then there is no need to subject the manufacturers to this particular levy. Mr. Speaker, if you go to section 24.1,
The Honorable Senator Sifuna, you will have 5 minutes of your time to conclude on your contributions when the bill is in the order. Honorable Senators, it is now 6:30 p.m. time to adjourn the Senate. The Senate therefore stands adjourned until tomorrow, Wednesday, 27th of March 2024 at 9:30 a.m.
against conflict, against the invasion of another country. Kenya has the view of shared prosperity.